Hey guys, you've come to the right place. This channel is all about exciting, entertaining, and engaging videos that will keep you hooked from start to finish. If you enjoy this kind of content, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss out on anything new.
Growing up in rural Ohio, I was never the kind of kid anyone would have called destined for anything. My dad fixed HVAC units for a living. My mom worked checkout at a grocery store, and we lived in a house where the back porch screen was broken for 4 years before anyone got around to fixing it. But I had this thing. I noticed problems before other people did, and I couldn't stop thinking about how to solve them. By the time I was in my late 20s, that habit had turned into a small but solid home inspection and property consulting company. Nothing glamorous. I drove a truck, wore steel-toed boots, and came home smelling like crawl spaces and attic insulation. But the business grew steadily, and when I turned 32, I had 11 employees and contracts with 3 of the largest real estate firms in the county. That's when I met my wife. She was at a charity auction. One of those things where you show up because a client invited you and you don't know a single person in the room. She was laughing at something her friend said, loud enough that it cut through all the small talk, and it was the most honest sound in the whole building. Her name was Sandra. She was warm, quick-witted, and completely unimpressed by the fact that I owned a business. That last part was what got me. We were married 2 years later. Our son Marcus was born the year after that. Life felt, I don't know how else to put it, earned, like I'd built something real, piece by piece, and it was standing. For about 6 years it stood. Then Sandra told me she'd been seeing someone. She didn't confess out of guilt. She told me like she was presenting a business proposal. We were in the kitchen after dinner, Marcus asleep upstairs, and she sat down across from me with her hands folded on the table and said she'd been in a relationship with a man named Derek for the past 7 months. He was a regional sales director for a pharmaceutical company. They'd met at one of her volunteer events. She said she still loved me in a certain way, but that Derek gave her something she'd been missing, and she wasn't willing to end it. Then she said, and I remember this so clearly because my hands went completely cold, "I'm not asking your permission. I'm telling you, so we can figure out how to handle this like adults." I sat there for what felt like a long time. "And if I don't want to handle it like that?" I asked. She looked at me with this expression I'd never seen on her before. Patient, rehearsed. Then you'd be making things a lot harder for Marcus and for yourself financially. There it was. She knew the business was in my name. She knew that without a job for the past 3 years, she'd stopped working when Marcus was born. She'd have a strong alimony claim. She knew the math, and she'd done it before she sat down at that table. I nodded slowly. I told her I needed some air. I walked out to the backyard and stood in the dark for a while, listening to the neighbor's dog bark at nothing. I didn't make any decisions that night. That was probably the smartest thing I ever did, not deciding anything while I was that angry. What I did instead was think. I called my friend Ray the next morning. Ray and I had been friends since middle school. He'd gone a different direction than me. Got a law degree, then a second one in financial forensics. Eventually started his own firm handling high-stakes divorce and asset litigation. His wife, Teresa, was the kind of quiet, precise person who could walk into a room and immediately understand the power structure in it. They were both the kind of people who, when you called them with a problem, didn't offer sympathy first. They offered clarity. I told Ray everything over coffee at his office. He listened without interrupting, which is rare for him. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "How much do you know about Derek?" I knew his first name, the company he worked for, and what he looked like from Sandra's phone, which she'd left unlocked on the counter once while she was in the shower. I wasn't proud of that, but I'd looked. Ray nodded. "That's enough to start. Don't do anything yet. Don't move money. Don't change account access. Don't say anything to Sandra that sounds like a plan. You're just a husband trying to figure out his marriage. That's all." Teresa set down her coffee and added without looking up, "Does she know you know about the phone?" "No." "Good. Keep it that way." Over the following 3 weeks, I kept living my life. I was home for dinner. I was present with Marcus. I was polite with Sandra. She seemed to interpret my calm as acceptance, which was exactly what I needed her to think. What I was actually doing was getting my affairs in order in ways that were entirely legal and entirely quiet. The business. I'd been meaning to restructure it for tax purposes for 2 years. I finally did. I brought in Ray as a limited partner on paper, which shifted a significant portion of the company's assessed value. It was something my accountant had recommended before any of this, documented in emails from the prior year. Nothing suspicious, nothing rushed. I also started keeping notes, dates, times, observations. Nothing dramatic, just a log. The kind of record a careful man keeps when his life is changing. Meanwhile, I learned more about Derek. He was married. His wife's name was Carol. They had 2 kids in elementary school. He'd been with a pharmaceutical company for 9 years and had a reputation, according to one former colleague, I reached through a mutual contact, of doing this kind of thing regularly. He was good-looking, smooth, and accustomed to getting away with it. I sat on that information for a while. I wasn't sure what to do with it yet. I wasn't going to do anything reckless, but I filed it away. About 6 weeks after Sandra's announcement, she started pushing me for a real conversation about the future. She wanted to know where I stood. She framed it as being fair to me, giving me the chance to voice my feelings. What she actually wanted was for me to either accept the arrangement or initiate a divorce on her timeline, before I'd had time to fully prepare. I told her I was still processing, that I loved our family and wasn't ready to give up on it. She looked relieved. That was a mistake on her part, confusing my patience for weakness. The thing that changed everything happened 2 months later. I was picking Marcus up from a birthday party on a Saturday afternoon. Sandra was supposed to be at a junior league meeting. On my way home, I passed the Marriott on Cheltenham Drive and saw our car in the parking lot, not parked near the entrance. Parked around the side, the way you park when you don't want to be seen. I didn't stop. I drove home, got Marcus settled with a snack and a movie, and sat in my office for a long time. I called Ray. She's at the Marriott on Cheltenham right now, I said. Saturday afternoon. All right, he said. Don't go over there. Don't call her. Do you have any way to document the vehicle situation without going inside? I did. I drove back, parked on the street, and took a clear photograph of her car in the lot with a hotel sign visible. Timestamp on the photo. I texted it to Ray. Good, he said. Now come home. That was the weekend I made my decision. The marriage was over. The only question was how to make sure I came out of it with my company, my son, and my dignity intact. Ray and I spent the next 3 weeks building a file. We were careful, methodical, and thorough. Derek, it turned out, had a contractual morality clause in his employment agreement. Standard for his level at the company, apparently. His company didn't know about the affair. Neither did his wife. I chose to tell Carol. I want to be honest about why. Part of it was that she deserved to know. Part of it was strategic. A wife who knows about an affair is less likely to blame the other spouse and more likely to apply pressure that removes Derek from the equation. I'm not going to pretend it was purely noble. It was both. I reached out through a mutual contact who knew Carol from their kids' school. I met her for coffee on a Wednesday morning. She was a composed, polished woman who coached youth soccer on weekends and ran a tight household almost entirely by herself, because Derek traveled constantly for work. She sat down across from me, and before I could say anything, she said, "This isn't the first time someone sat across from me with this conversation." I put the folder on the table. She didn't cry. She looked at the photos and the records, closed the folder quietly, and said, "How long?" "At least 7 months that I can document." She nodded once. "Thank you for telling me." We talked for another hour. She had her own attorney already, kept on retainer, she said, because she'd always suspected this day would come. She was going to file immediately. She asked if I'd be willing to share documentation with her lawyer. I said yes. 2 weeks later, Derek's company received an anonymous complaint regarding conduct unbecoming to his role, accompanied by documentation of the hotel visits, on company time, as it turned out, because he occasionally met Sandra during his weekday sales calls. He was placed on administrative leave pending review. That review did not go well for him. Sandra called me the night she heard. She was furious in a way I hadn't seen before. Not controlled, not strategic, just raw and rattled. "Did you do this?" she demanded. "Did I do what?" I said. "Derek, his job. Someone went to his company." "I've been focused on our family, Sandra." She didn't speak for a moment. "Then you need to stop this. Whatever you're doing, you need to stop." "I haven't done anything," I said. "I'm just trying to figure out how to hold our marriage together. Isn't that what you wanted?" She hung up. Over the next few weeks, something interesting happened. Derek, suddenly unemployed and facing his own divorce proceedings, became considerably less romantic. The calls between them, which I was no longer monitoring because I didn't need to, apparently dropped off sharply according to what Sandra told me herself one evening when she was trying to make sense of it all out loud. She'd forgotten, briefly, whose side I was on. She asked me if we could try counseling. I sat with that for a day. Not because I was considering it, I wasn't, but because I didn't want to respond wrong. I told her I needed to think about it. Then I served her the divorce papers. The filing cited adultery. Ray had documented it well. This state takes fault into account in asset division, and Sandra's attorney, a sharp woman named whoever who charged by the 10th of an hour and didn't waste syllables, told her early on that fighting it would cost more than it would gain. Sandra cried. She apologized. She said Derek was a mistake, and that she'd panicked during a hard period in our marriage, and that she'd spent 7 months making a decision she'd spend the rest of her life regretting. I believed her. I believed she meant every word of it. And it didn't change anything. I'm not doing this out of anger, I told her. I'm doing it because I know who I am, and I can't unknow what I know about who you decided to be. She asked if there was anything she could say. I told her the kindest thing she could say. I told her the kindest thing she could do for Marcus was to make the process as clean as possible. She did. To her credit, she did. The settlement took 4 months. She received the house. I didn't want it. Too many memories, and frankly, it made legal sense to offer it early, rather than have a judge decide, along with a structured support arrangement for Marcus. I kept the business. I kept the truck. I kept my self-respect, which was the thing I'd been most afraid of losing. Marcus handled it better than I expected, and worse than I hoped. He was 7. He understood that his mom and dad weren't going to live together anymore. He didn't fully understand why. I wasn't going to be the one to explain it in detail. What I told him was that sometimes adults make decisions that hurt the people they love, and it doesn't mean they stop loving their kids, and it doesn't mean his dad was going anywhere. He asked me once if I was sad. I told him yes, sometimes. He nodded like that made sense and went back to whatever he was building on the floor. Kids are straightforward in a way that I found, that year, genuinely medicinal. My friend Ray's wife Teresa had a younger sister named Vivienne who I'd met once or twice over the years at their backyard cookouts. She was a structural engineer, quiet in the way that people who are very good at what they do sometimes are, with a dry sense of humor that you could miss if you weren't paying attention. She'd been through her own version of loss. A long engagement that ended when her fiancé relocated for work and decided, apparently, that she wasn't worth the distance. She didn't talk about it much. You got the sense she'd processed it in private and set it down. About 18 months after the divorce was finalized, Teresa invited me to a small dinner at their house. 6 people. Vivian was there. We talked for most of the evening about a city infrastructure project that was causing headaches for half the real estate clients in my network. She knew the project inside out. I found myself forgetting to check my phone, which hadn't happened at a social event longer than I could remember. I called Ray the next day and asked if it would be weird. He laughed for about 4 seconds straight. I've been waiting for you to ask that since last Christmas, he said. I asked Vivian to dinner the following week. She said yes. That was 3 years ago. She's sitting in the next room right now, going over plans for a pedestrian bridge project she's been working on for months, with a cup of tea that's probably gone cold because she always forgets to drink it. Marcus calls her Viv. He likes that she explains the structural logic of things he asks about rather than simplifying down to his age. He's 9 now and already knows more about load-bearing principles than most adults I know. Sandra remarried last spring, a man she met through the same charity circuit where she'd met Derek. I heard through mutual friends that she seems happy. I hope it's true. I don't carry anything heavy about Sandra anymore. Not bitterness, not longing, just the memory of a marriage that ended because one of us stopped treating it like it mattered. Derek didn't resurface in our lives. He found work at a smaller company in another state. Carol settled her divorce quietly and, from what I understand, is doing well. She coaches soccer. Her kids are fine. Some things are really that clean once the messy part is done. What I know now, at 51, that I didn't know at 44, when someone tells you who they are by what they do when they think it won't cost them anything, believe them immediately. Don't negotiate with it. Don't absorb it into your picture of them and hope the picture holds. It won't. The version of me who sat in that kitchen and kept his hands flat on the table and said nothing. That guy was afraid. Afraid of starting over. Afraid of what the business would look like after a contested divorce. afraid of who he'd be without the marriage he'd built. Those are legitimate fears. I'm not ashamed of them. But the version of me who got up the next morning and called Ray and said, "Let's think clearly about this," that guy is the one I'm glad became the rest of my life. Marcus just came downstairs. He wants to know if Vivian and I want to watch a movie. She's already calling back from the other room that she'll watch anything as long as it doesn't involve a car chase in the first 5 minutes. I close my laptop and I go join my family. I've thought a lot about what made the difference, not just in how things turned out legally or financially, but in how I came out of it as a person. And the honest answer is that it wasn't the strategy. It wasn't calling Ray or the restructuring or any of the careful moves I made in those months. Those things mattered, but they weren't the core of it. The core of it was one decision I made in the backyard that first night. In the dark, while the neighbor's dog was barking, I decided not to react from the worst version of myself. That sounds simple. It wasn't. Because the worst version of me wanted to walk back into that kitchen and say things that couldn't be unsaid. Wanted to make Sandra feel, in that moment, exactly what she'd made me feel. And that version of me would have burned everything. The business, the custody arrangement, my ability to be present for Marcus, just for the satisfaction of 5 minutes of righteous anger. Sandra made a choice. She made it deliberately, and then she sat down across from me and told me it was already done. And if I didn't like it, the consequences were my problem. That wasn't a mistake. That wasn't confusion. That was someone showing you exactly who they were under pressure when they thought the math worked in their favor. What I've learned is that people reveal their real character not in the easy moments, but in the moments when they believe they can get away with something. Sandra believed she could. Derek believed it too, and for a while, both of them are right. That's the part nobody talks about. Sometimes the person who does wrong gets away with it for a long time, and the one left holding the damage has to figure out how to live inside that unfairness without letting it hollow them out. The way you survive that is by being scrupulously honest with yourself about what you actually control. I couldn't control what Sandra did. I couldn't undo 7 months of a marriage being betrayed in hotel parking lots. What I could control was whether I responded with intelligence or just with pain. Whether I protected Marcus's future or sacrificed it for my ego. Whether the man who came out the other side of it was someone I could respect. Carol sitting across from me at that coffee shop and saying, "This isn't the first time someone sat across from me with this conversation," that stayed with me. She wasn't broken by it. She was prepared. There's something instructive in that. She'd built a life that could withstand the impact of someone else's worst choices. Not because she knew it was coming, but because she'd never stopped being herself in the middle of her marriage. That's the thing I want Marcus to understand when he's old enough. Not the tactics, not how to win a divorce. But this, the life you build on honest ground, holds when things shake. The version of you that acts with integrity even when nobody's watching. That version compounds over time. It becomes who you are. And who you are is the only thing nobody else can touch. I closed the laptop. I went to watch the movie. Vivian had already found the remote.